All right, well, I know we have a lot to cover, so pun intended, let's dive right in. Hello, welcome to Faster, Higher, Stronger, preparing for the Olympic and the Paralympic Games in a time of uncertainty. I think this is probably the longest title that we have had in one of our SportsTech Canon webinar series. I'm Jenna Kurath. I'm Vice President of Startup Partner Development at Comcast and head of Comcast NBCU SportsTech. And today I am joined by a Paralympic gold and medalist, bronze medalist, 15-time world champion swimmer, Mallory Wegman. Outside of the pool, Mallory is also co-founder of TFA Productions, a studio utilizing the power of storytelling to change perception of disability and drive global awareness for the Paralympic movement. It's a studio that she co-founded with her husband, so she has intimate knowledge of entrepreneurship and the startup life. We're also fortunate to be joined today with Matt Barbini. He is a national team director of performance for USA Swimming. And Matt helps out Team USA athletes get more medals, and he works closely advising our SportsTech Accelerator startups in our program right now. So today we are going to cover a number of topics, everything from the great sports shutdown of 2020, pandemic training, athlete schedules, lives, and so much more. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you both join us today. Mallory, I would love to start with you. So first off, it's kind of interesting introducing you now. The last time we were together, it was actually on stage at an event in Atlanta. And here we are nearing the Paralympic Games. And some exciting news for you, you raced this past weekend. And so I would love for you to just tell us about that. How did it feel to get back in the water and back into that competitive mindset?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jenna, thanks so much for having me today. It is definitely different to be virtual than last time we were in person together, but also it's remarkable to see how much we have all pivoted and just found a way to adapt this past year. So, this weekend I had the great joy of getting up and racing. And I say that because if this year hasn't taught us that those little simple joys are not guarantees in life, then I really don't know what has, right? So now every day I go to the pool, it's I get to train, not I have to train. And it's just that reminder that this is an opportunity and not to be taken for granted. And so I was really excited on Saturday I'm in Minnesota. I got to go to the University of Minnesota, which is one of my favorite pools to race at, and just swim in a club meet. And, I turned 32 on Friday and I raced 13-year-old kids on Saturday. It was perfect. And I had a blast doing it though. And, getting behind the blocks and just kind of shaking out 14 months of being dry from racing was a good feeling as I get ready for my meet in Texas. I swam 2 races, but I also broke the American record in both events, which was such a great way to come back to racing and my little birthday present, if you will, to myself, to just show, I think in times like this, it's so easy and to look back to kind of where we were and use past performances and metrics as a guiding tool, if you will, for what we want to become. And I've navigated through my fair share of injuries throughout my career, and unfortunately ones that have been left with permanent situations. And I think the biggest thing I learned, and what Saturday was such a strong reminder of, is the power that exists when we let go of past circumstances and experiences as kind of that metric we use for what we're looking to move into. And we just give ourselves the freedom to move forward into who we're going to become. And I say that because it's easy to look at what I once did as an athlete, but I think that puts a glass ceiling. And honestly, if I was always looking back to my past accolades, I don't know if Saturday would have happened. And Saturday happened because I showed up at a pool. I was having a blast. I got my work in. I did my warm up the way I knew how I was supposed to. I didn't overthink it. I just let myself have fun. And I didn't put that pressure of last year, this time I was here. I need to be back here or better to be where I want to be going into Tokyo. And frankly, I was significantly faster than I've ever been in my career in those 2 races. And so that was a really exciting spot to be on Saturday, and makes me look forward to taper here in a few weeks to see what's to come.
Well, congratulations. No better birthday present to give yourself than that to shatter some of those records there. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Matt, would love for you to share a little bit. So as Director of Performance, can you tell us a little bit about your role and how you have helped so many athletes? What's your team focus on? What are your goals, and how do you define success? Because I imagine it's got to be a lot more than just the medal count.
Yeah, first, like Mallory, really happy to be here and really appreciate the opportunity. Congratulations on the American record. I did not know that. You've put me in a tough spot of having to follow that announcement. I have nothing as exciting as that to report, but congratulations. My job is to coordinate all the performance services that we offer to national team athletes and coaches. And Mallory just made a great point about not looking backwards. A lot of what we do is present focused or near-term future focused. And my job is to, in many cases, to extend that focus out a little bit further. So we want to be great this summer in Tokyo, and we want to be great in the other competitions, at Olympic trials and other competitions that happen this year. But we also want to be great in Paris, and we want to be great in LA. And so, my job encompasses everything from the nitty-gritty of performance analytics at a meet that's happening, next week, all the way to long-term athlete development, and how do we make sure that our programs and systems are supporting our performance, not just this year, but in the years to come, especially now that we're staring down a 3-year quad as opposed to a 4-year quad. So adapting to the situation and making sure that we're going to be prepared for all of those things. Defining success for us, obviously, medals is a huge part of our success. We cannot discount that. At the same time, we do not pursue medals at the expense of everything else. We certainly want athletes to come out of their swimming career feeling like we supported them and facilitated their swimming, while also supporting and facilitating what they're going to do after swimming. And my job is really about providing resources and opportunities to athletes and coaches. And a huge part of that is resources and opportunities that will help you achieve a podium level performance, or just whatever your own goals are. And then a big piece of that is also what you do next, and how we can support you in relating what your swimming career to whatever you do when you're done in the pool.
Love that. Well, you mentioned an interesting point. It's now a 3-year cycle. So often as an athlete, and Mallory would love to have you speak to this, you live your life typically in these 4-year quads. All of the training, all of your support system, not only what you do in the pool, but the whole support system around you is really geared to strategically having everything line up to physically being at your peak, physically and mentally for that moment. Can you talk a little bit about how this has changed your life in ways that we probably can't even fully appreciate?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you're having that conversation of 4 years to 3 years, and that 1 year doesn't seem like a lot maybe to some, but it's 25% of the time we have in that plan. And as you get older in your career as an athlete, particularly, you kind of start to plan life as it fits in that quad. So that year after a games might be the year. For me in 2016, it was the year that I got married. I got married December following the 2016 games, and that was planned around the games themselves, right? And so you can kind of see how this cycle goes down, whether it's finishing school, going to grad school, starting a career outside of the pool, getting married, starting a family. There's all these decisions we try to cram in, if you will, to that 4-year calendar, while being mindful of that final year. And so when we approached this conversation a year ago this month, and the postponement came out, I know for myself, and I'm certain for a number of other athletes, that was part of the shakeup. It wasn't just, oh, okay, the games are going to be postponed, I need to rethink my training cycle. It's, okay, I had these plans laid for life because I've been planning on this 4-year quad. And especially if you're not thinking of retiring after Tokyo, now your next quad just became 3 years. And so you don't have that kind of buffer year you get on year 1 of the quad. And that for me personally was really challenging. I think that was the hardest part of the postponement in the initial days to really come to terms with. And And candidly, my husband and I were planning a family around Tokyo, and I was so ready to be a mom. And that was a big part of, last year, this time, it was like, I'm really excited for Tokyo, but I'm really excited to start that next stage in my life. And I knew we were getting close to that point, and, thinking that what would have been right now, hopefully us in that process. And so that can be challenging. And when you look forward to the 3-year quad, I personally don't plan on retiring after Tokyo. I would love to go to a games as a mom. And so now it's looking at 3 years, and then how do I, as a female athlete, factor in starting a family, giving my body a chance to recover from what has now been a 5-year quad, and then getting back into peak performance by 2024. And so there's kind of just this, it's a little bit of a puzzle to figure out where the right moves are. And then, as Matt talked about, athletes also are looking to figure out who they are outside of the pool or outside of their sport. And so knowing that at this stage of my career, Tokyo will be my 3rd Paralympic Games, and I'm in my 30s and I have other goals and ambitions in my life outside of the sport. How do I balance those in a kind of more truncated timeline? And so it is a puzzle, but I think that's part of what makes it fun. And that's where, anyone who's gone through the startup process, it seems a bit overwhelming, and sometimes the timelines don't add up and they're not perfect, and you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole and figure out how this all works out. But that's what challenges us. That's what forces us to get creative and to adapt and to pivot and to lean into areas and try new things that, frankly, we might fall flat on our face doing, but that's where we kind of pick up the pieces and say, okay, this worked, this didn't. Let's pick it up and try it again, doing it this way. And that's been really fun. I think with this being now a 5th year, is having that time and the space to do that. And you could say that we didn't have a choice, but I think we as athletes, of course, had a choice. We could flex and adapt, or we could just say, well, I don't have access to training. What do you want me to do? And I think the flexing and adapting was a lot of fun, and just finding a way to have fun with it makes it that much more bearable, even when it's a circumstance that you didn't necessarily sign up for.
Absolutely. Well, it's just a reminder too that strategy is in every single aspect of what you do as an athlete. We see that same parallel all the time with the startups in our SportsTech Accelerator program. It's that same sort of grit, resiliency, putting it all on the line and knowing that you're going to have to constantly iterate and learn and experiment and try things on the path to success. And so you're right, a pandemic, it comes with tragedy and loss, but it has also come with these beautiful silver linings. But I would like to go back just for a moment and ask you, Matt, there was this period of time when pools were shutting down, universities and training centers were shutting down. Could you take us back to sort of that, almost that cloud of uncertainty period of when that was happening, to even when the Olympics and the Paralympics were postponed? Take us back to that. Where were you when you heard the news, and how did your team react?
Yeah. We had a number of things happening. We had just come off of our best domestic meet in several years. It was a Pro Swim Series meet in Des Moines, and it was awesome. And we were finally feeling like we were moving towards the Olympic year. There's always sort of this moment where you're like, okay, now we're in it. Now it's an Olympic year, and now we're pressing forward. And that actually is a function of sort of the flow of the 4-year cycle. And so it hit in March, and we all came home feeling great, but with this concern of there's this pandemic that we don't know it wasn't a pandemic yet, but we don't know what's going to happen with this. And we had a significant training camp happening at the Olympic Training Center starting that week. And so we had 20 or so of our best athletes in town as things slowly started to get worse and worse. And then I remember it was a Wednesday night, the NBA shut down, and we had not closed yet, and everything was still going. And by Friday, the OTC had closed to new arrivals, and by Saturday, they had kicked everybody out. And so we were sort of one of the last groups still training, depending on where you were in the country, that had consistent access. So while we were still, that group of 20 was still training for that week, every program in the country was searching for a pool or searching for an answer to either stay in the water. And the reason that became so intense was that there hadn't been a cancellation or a postponement yet. So everybody felt like, oh my God, I'm falling behind, either domestically to make the team or internationally where the pandemic hadn't hit yet and people were still swimming. And that anxiety was overwhelming and pervasive. And it's one of the few things that's powerless for us. There was very little we could do about it. We helped people try to find pools, but there really wasn't anything we could do to take the anxiety away from feeling like that was kind of hanging over everybody. And that felt like it went on forever. And I went back and looked last week in preparing for this, and it was 7 days. It really wasn't that long at all, but it felt like an eternity that happened. And then it sounds strange to say, but once the postponement came, there was relief. I mean, it's sadness, and it's obviously a lost opportunity for a lot of people, but a bad answer in many cases is better than no answer. And now everybody went back to the same situation. Everybody had a year plus to prepare. Everybody was able to remake their plans, and nobody was in a situation where they were looking at the landscape of swimming and saying, I am falling behind and I'm losing my opportunity to no fault of my own. So as bad as it actually was sort of a relief for a lot of people.
Well, you did see in that, and it's true, 7 days, somehow 7 days and COVID feels like a lifetime and 7 seconds and 7 minutes ago. It's the most bizarre thing. And if you think back at that time too, we were learning so much about how do you really keep yourself safe and masks and how contagious was this? And so there were so many different factors and new information coming out all the time. So that's certainly, I imagine, Mallory, you maybe had some interesting and creative ways that you trained, because we certainly saw people set up, kiddie pools in their backyard and bungee cords and trying to jump in lakes that are, sub 60 degrees, which doesn't sound pleasant. Any interesting or creative things that you did in that moment?
Yeah, as Matt was talking, I'm in my head reliving the Wednesday night announcement. We left for team camp in Florida the next morning. We were down there as a team. And I mean, literally that Thursday, one by one, as athletes showed up, they were getting emails from their universities or their coaches saying they were going to come back to no training. And we had a test set Saturday morning as a team. And it was probably one of my favorite test sets I've ever done as a team. And then when we got out of the pool, our coaches notified us that we would all be sent home the next morning. And many of the athletes were going home to already closed facilities. And I was really fortunate. I had one day, and we knew it was borrowed time, but I had one day. I had Monday, and I was able to go to my strength facility and kind of come up with a plan and get a good workout in while getting creative ideas of like, okay, how can we adapt this to being at home in my garage? And mind you, I'm in Minnesota, so everything's still frozen in March. So open water anywhere outside is not an option. And so then I had a day with my coach in the pool, and I just swam like a mad woman. And he at one point said, Mal, I'm going to give you now a goal time of you cannot go faster than this, or you're going to bury yourself for the week. And I just looked at him and I was like, we're not going to have training this week. Like, let me go after it and just take my frustration out over this black line right now. And so that night we did dinner with his family, and we were with him when the governor in Minnesota announced that all facilities would shut down effective immediately at midnight. And, it was interesting because immediately I just kind of, I let the emotion out, start crying. And within then 5 minutes, we kind of flipped the switch and we sat down, and it was my husband and my coach and his wife and his daughters were there. And we all started coming up with our plan. And I got a Vasa trainer from somebody in our community who had one that they were going to lend me because I don't have one of my own. My coach owns a CrossFit gym, and so they had extra equipment. My strength and conditioning facility was obviously starting to shut down, so they had equipment. And my husband and I went out the next day with my van and literally loaded the back of it up with a lot of love from a lot of people in our community, and brought it home and cleared out our garage and made it what it was. And I sat down that day with a roll of black gaffed tape, because we're a production studio and we have gaff tape every which corner of our house. And I taped a black line underneath that Vasa trainer. And my little creative thing that I did for myself was, the black line is just such a mental place for me to go and just kind of be. And so I have always loved in a meters pool the fact that the line comes to a T 1.6 meters from the wall. And for me, after my paralysis, that was always something that signified the black line can lead me forward, but at some point I need to make this choice for myself, and I need to fight for myself, and it can't take me all the way. And the irony is I won gold in London in the final 1.6 meters of my race. I literally, my last arm stroke is how I won that race. And so I decided to tape it underneath me, but in a way where the shuttle on the Vasa trainer could never actually reach me to what would be the wall, right? So the T was kind of like under me. So I was always hovering over that final 1.6 meters, kind of telling me like, I have to make this choice right now, because that's right. That 7 days when we shut down before that postponement announcement came, it felt like an eternity. And so we were fighting during that, like training as if the games were still on. And then once the announcement came, there was some relief. We still kept our creative workouts in the garage. And I was on a Vasa trainer for 2.5 months. And then when weather warmed up here, I was able to get into a colleague's backyard pool and just tied a bungee strap around a diving board and swam in place for, hours on end, day in and day out, just to keep my feel for the water before I finally got access to an actual pool in July.
Yeah. See, there's the bungee cord again.
Bungee cord.
Who knew how vital it is? That's not a use case that the bungee cord is typically used for, but certainly we saw that. And Matt, I imagine you probably heard of a number of other sort of creative things. Anything else you want to throw in the mix?
Yeah, there's a couple. The bungee cord, I think a lot of people's favorite was Kelsey Dahlia, who's a top butterflyer of ours, swimming in literally a kiddie pool on a bungee cord. I mean, it couldn't have been more than 3 feet deep. And I mean, she could almost touch both ends with her hands and feet while doing a butterfly stroke. But same thing, attached to a tether, just kind of spinning her arms, trying to keep some feel for her stroke and for the water. Some of the funniest stuff came from the dry land. There was an athlete who we have video of squatting, holding her dog as though it's a kettlebell. There was an athlete who used textbooks to do step-ups. I don't know what kind of classes she's taking, that she has textbooks that are heavy enough that you can do a step-up with them. But yeah, people were just kind of grabbing whatever they could to try to get some kind of workout. Like you said, Mallory, just figuring out some way to keep a level of fitness when you really weren't allowed to do anything for a brief period of time.
And frankly, with uncertainty comes so much extra sort of stress, and stress is not great for performance situations. It's certainly not great for an athlete as they're just adapting to, because it's not just the physical that we've been talking about, but it's also the mental. So Mallory, I love like just the black line. It's the things that get you in the headspace. Can you share a little bit more about that change for you, not just physically, but mentally as well?
The mental shift for me was the hardest in some regards. I say that kind of hesitant because I felt like I kind of had two sides of my personality showing. The athlete in me was, I adapted like that. The logic, the understanding the process, how we're going to do this, coming up with a plan, that clicked in really quick. And that's just been a natural thing. I think at this stage of my career, I've had enough injuries. I've been through enough kind of undesirable circumstances that adapting has become a bit second nature, if you will. But the emotional toll on just kind of me as a person and things I was looking forward to in my life, the changes, what that meant. And also I think just for all of us, we experienced this change in our routine and our day to day. And, swimming is a big part of my life, but so is my career outside of the pool. And it's a big part of my identity, and our entire world stopped, and we weren't seeing family. We weren't seeing friends. We weren't seeing loved ones. And so, well, it was tough that I couldn't swim. Once the games were postponed, to Matt's point, there was that level of relief where it's like, okay, I don't need to stress about this because we're all on the same page. We've got 18 months now. There's time on the clock, and we're not stressing, trying to figure out how we're going to make a team in a couple months with no pool. And so that's, I think, when kind of more of just the personal side of the overall effect of the pandemic hit, of not being able to see my parents or my sisters. And I think that was really challenging. But one piece of it that I'm really grateful that I did have was in January, I started writing my book, Limitless. And I was not even halfway through the process. I had a good chunk left before manuscript submittal in June. And so when everything slowed down in April, I just kind of said, you know what, I'm going to do my workouts every morning and they're going to be what they are. And I'm going to do them for me mentally and emotionally. And then I'm going to go to my writing. And it was a space that I was able to just kind of be, and it helped me slow things down, take the pressure off, process and focus on something that I could control, because I couldn't control the fact that my athletic career was in a complete halt at the time, just as everyone else's was. I couldn't control the fact that in our business, all production stopped the minute everything else shut down, or my entire speaking career stopped. I mean, everything stopped. And it was like overnight. And so writing was the place I could go and I could express myself. I could feel what I needed to feel. And I think that's such a big learning for all of us through this is, I mean, it might sound cheesy, but just honoring where we're at and what we're going through. And if today's a hard day, just letting it be a hard day and not forcing ourselves to spin out thinking that, building that guilt on of, well, we should be better. It's like, no, we get to have hard days. It's been a really hard year. Our world has changed. And that's okay to just say that. And so that was a really big thing for me of just giving myself that space. And there were days where I was really, really sad about the idea that a family was going to be postponed. I mean, just like gut wrenching, where I didn't even want to go in my recovery room in our house because that's the room that will get turned into a nursery someday. And so like, there's just little things like that. And at first I kind of felt guilty and a little stupid, if you will, for feeling that. Cause I'm like, it's just a year. There's so many worse things going on in our world. But I think when we do that, we devalue our own emotions, and then we now feel guilty for feeling sad, which makes us just feel more sad. And so I just kind of had to stop myself and say, you know what, it's going to be okay if I have a hard day, and I'll get up tomorrow and I'll keep putting, I would say, one foot in front of the other, but I wheel. So one hand in front of the other, whatever version that would be. And that's all any of us can do. And yeah, but it has been a tough year. I think we can all say that.
We can all say that. But I think we can also, in fairness, say that you are probably a champion when it comes to dealing with adversity. And for people who may not know the backstory of a post shingles treatment, walking in and not walking out, can you spend a little bit of time talking about that? Because I think there could be so many lessons for everybody to learn about what adversity hands you and how you can embrace that, or you can let it shut you down.
Yeah. So when I was 18 years old, back in 2008, I walked into a clinic to receive what was to be my third and final epidural injection for back pain. And I just had this nasty nerve pain as a result of kind of post residual pain from shingles that I got my senior year of high school. And unfortunately, that day, January 21st, 2008, I didn't walk out. And due to complications from the procedure, I was left paralyzed. And it was 2 months before my 19th birthday. And I didn't know what my future looked like. I was heartbroken. I was devastated, as you can imagine. And there were a lot of questions of what would living life in a wheelchair look like for the things that I wanted to do. And fortunately for me, I found the sport of swimming again, just 2.5 months after my injury. I had been a club swimmer since I was 7 years old. I competed all the way through senior year in high school. My two older sisters swam competitively as well. And swimming was just my world. It was my community. Our laundry room constantly smelled like chlorine because we had suits hanging, waiting to dry from the next day's practice or a meet over the weekend. It was everything I knew as a kid. And I naturally assumed after my paralysis that that would be one of the many things on the list of things that I wouldn't do again. And in April of 2008, the trials for the Paralympic Games in Beijing for swimming were being hosted at the University of Minnesota. And admittedly, at that stage of my life, I didn't know about the Paralympic movements. I didn't know about adaptive sport. I really didn't know that world was out there. And we read a local newspaper article on that Saturday, and the final session was that evening. And so my family kind of said, let's go check it out. And we went to the pool that night, and And it's funny because even just this weekend when I was at the U, every time I look to that railing, I just remember that day. And I went into the stands and there's a railing right there. And I wheeled over and I looked down over the railing onto the pool deck. And it was the first time I felt hope for what could be in my life. And it wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, I'm going to go be a Paralympian, but just I hadn't seen people that I saw myself in. I hadn't seen other people with disabilities since my injury, because in rehab, I was in rehab with a lot of older individuals who were rehabbing strokes or various different things. There wasn't any other people's spinal cord injuries or young individuals that I felt like I saw myself in. And that night was such a special point in my life because it not only inspired me, but empowered me and gave me something to cling on to. It gave me a little flicker of light. And 48 hours later, I went back to that pool and I got in the water at the University of Minnesota on that Monday for the first time since my paralysis. And man, within 4 or 5 strokes of being over that black line that day, it was like everything changed. My whole world changed. I felt in control. I felt at peace. I felt like there was a place that I could go and feel understood. Like it was just my place I could be. And, you know, here I am 12 years later. And in that time, I've sustained another injury. I have permanent nerve injury to my left arm as a result of an injury in 2014. And I've had my fair share of blows throughout my career. But that love that I had on April 8th, 2008, when the water welcomed me back at probably the darkest time in my life, that is what has sustained me to this point in my career. And on paper, I probably shouldn't have been able to break those American records this weekend. I mean, on paper, doing what I'm doing, I broke a 100-yard IM by almost 4 seconds. That's a lot of time in 100 yards. And I used to have that record when I was 21 years old and I'm 32. Like on paper, it doesn't make sense that I keep getting faster, yet I'm working with less body. But I am, and I think that just shows the power of creativity and also what happens when you truly lean into your passion and have an understanding of what your why and what your purpose is and what you're doing, because it fuels you and it gives you the resilience to sustain whatever blows come your way.
Oh, you found the black line again. Yeah, so much of that brings you back home. And Matt, I'm sure you can relate to this with all the various athletes that you've worked with as they come up the development pipeline to the Team USA hopefuls, to the ones that go on to their path to the podium. It comes with an enormous amounts of high, and then also those moments of defeat where you have to pick yourself back up. And with that, there's that mental strain that comes with that. And how have you and your team seen ways that you can support just the mental health aspect of it, that it's okay to not feel okay?
Yeah, this has been a huge point of emphasis for us in the last couple of years. And you know, I think in a lot of sports, this has not always gotten the attention that it deserves. And there is a sports mentality sometimes that sort of, there is a required level of perseverance. There's a required level of toughness. And sometimes that obscures the need to give yourself space and permission to address the things that can't be powered through. And so we have made a huge emphasis to provide resources in this area, in the mental health area specifically, not just to athletes that succeed, but just as much for athletes that have setbacks. So if you're on our national team now, you have access to our entire suite of resources, and that goes backwards. So if you were on the 2016 Olympic team, you actually have access to it too, even though that was 5 years ago. So it's a huge point of emphasis. And we know that our sport is structured to, you know, that there will be people that come out of major competitions without performances that they want. And Olympic trials is the most stark example of this. It is a binary situation for many athletes at Olympic trials. You either make the team or you don't. And that is really difficult because you probably put a decade or more of your life into this pursuit, and it may have come down to a fractional second that you didn't reach it. And that certainly doesn't mean, there are so many people that I think look at that as though it's a failure. And it's like, if you got to within hundredths of a second of making the Olympic team, you are an awesome swimmer. You had an unbelievable career. You are the top 0.001% of swimmers in the US. But that yes or no can be defining. And I think there is definitely an emphasis on our part to help people realize that doesn't negate everything that you did before. And if you're going to keep going, it doesn't mean that you won't do better or do more later. But even if you go on to make an Olympic team next time, that also doesn't invalidate that experience that you had when you missed it. So it's complex. As a decentralized system, it can be a little tricky to try to create resources for 115 national team athletes and their coaches. That those are very, very individual circumstances that sometimes don't have a ton of overlap. But it's an area that we keep working at, and something that we'll keep trying to get better at as we learn more about it. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's just providing resources. Nobody has to take advantage of it. Nobody's required to do anything. But if you need the help, we are trying to offer it.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that we wove that in as a very important and intentional part of our program for the cohort of 10 startups that are in the program with us right now, which is really that mental health and wellness aspect of it, because same rigorous journey as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure, Mallory, you can appreciate this for you, the entrepreneurial side of your life too, with TFA Productions. It is a long and rigorous process of learning, iterating, having assumptions that could derail your business. It comes with massive highs, but massive lows. And being able to really keep centered around that, I think, is a really critical piece. I want to go back to, you kind of talked about it, the shaving of nanoseconds, the 10th of a second. And I have to say, if we look at it from a technology standpoint, as a runner, I'm really interested in that better, stronger, faster aspect of it. But I feel a little lost at how does that translate for a swimmer in particular. So maybe, Matt, at a big picture, some perspective, when coaches and athletes go to look at apps and numbers and video, like how granular is that process?
Yeah, that's part of the beauty of our decentralized system, is that for some, it is extremely granular, but it's also another thing that's really not required. So we definitely have programs that are into the minutia. They're tracking sleep, they're tracking reps and strength and conditioning. They're looking at all of the race analysis that we provide. We track stroke counts, stroke tempo, and times to certain points in the pool. There are comparative analyses that they'll do on their own to look at the information that we provide for them. Then there are programs that are much more less scientific and are more about feel. And there's a lot of success that comes out of both ends of those or both approaches. So again, it's our job. We will provide as much information as you're willing to take. If you want to get into the nitty gritty with us, we will provide as much as we possibly can. We provide resources to track sleep. We provide resources to track your dry land. We obviously provide performance resources after races. If we have a video of that race, we provide as much as we can above and underwater, just so you can see your stroke and analyze your technique. We'll provide feedback on that. And for athletes that want to take advantage of that, that's great. And some have definitely had a lot of success taking advantage of it. And then there are some that are just kind of like, we just do our thing. And so I always appreciate a consistency of approach. So if you're comfortable with what you're doing, I always like when people have a plan and they stick with it. And even if that means that they don't necessarily engage with our data and our technology as much as others do, if they're comfortable with our plan and it works for them, then that's great. And the alternate is true too. If you need help, or if you want as much information as you can get, we will provide it for you. So we are a little unique that way. We call it a national team, but we are spread across 60 programs in 25 states. So it's, again, it goes back to that. This is available to you. If you want to take it and think it will help you, then please engage with it.
And Mallory, I would love to know, as an athlete, take us to you personally. What's the technology, habits, data, things that you track, and anything new in COVID that might land and stick with you on the other side?
Yeah, listening to Matt, I think there is a lot of truth to, you have kind of two ends of the spectrum, and then sometimes a little bit of a middle ground where you play with a little bit of both. On the spectrum, I really like understanding the metrics, if you will, behind it, but I ultimately allow feel to be a big driving force, especially with my body, and as my body has changed over the years, and post arm injury. That was a big adjustment that my coach and I had to do, and really doing more with less and smarter, not harder. And frankly, we actually took some of my training down because we realized that I wasn't performing week after week after week. Like, it was just burying me because I wasn't getting enough recovery. And I actually need 2 days of recovery right now. And when we get closer to the games, I go back to my Saturday training, just keep my body in the water for 6 days. But the 2-day recovery made a big difference in the long-term goals than just muscling through the 6th day of training, because as a swimmer, that's what I feel like I have to do, because we pride ourselves on how many yards or meters we get in any given week. And taking yourself out of that and not feeling the pressure of having to conform to what we claim in any given sport makes you stronger, faster, and better, and finding out what actually makes you stronger, faster, and better, I think is such an important way to approach this. I have utilized devices such as Whoop for sleep and strain metrics. I really enjoyed it mainly for sleep. It's not something that I used very consistently during COVID to kind of get a gauge on things, but I prefer to bring technology in to arm me with knowledge and resources, and then kind of let it, once I feel like I've got a handle on it and I'm seeing where those habits play out, kind of let it die off and go back to kind of my instinctual gut reaction, if that makes sense. So one of my biggest data points, if you will, is I log every workout. And I have every workout logged. I journal about how I feel in the water. I've got my times. I know where I've been at different points. I've created understanding trends of, if I'm staying hydrated and getting X amount of sleep, this has been a common trend in how it affects my workouts. Like, I kind of have taken it upon myself through how I log in that process to view that, because, I like empowering myself with, again, doing more with less, because at a games, you have all of that, but every time you have to devote to that, it's less time recovering. It's less time getting your nutrition, and it's less time sleeping. So if your crutch is, I need to crunch every number, more power to you. But I more often in both my games experience will have 3 days where I'm racing prelim, final, prelim, final, prelim, final, 3 days in a row. And I need sleep, because at the end of the day, that's one of the non-negotiables for performance. And so I think that that's where I kind of lean on it in times to help give me a little bit more knowledge and arm me with that confidence. So then I can kind of take it upon myself and really trust that instinctual gut reaction to know what it is that I need to do, and be able to listen to my body in a confident way.
Yeah,
That's such a good point. Sorry, Jenna, that really,
No, go
like, it is so critical in an environment like the games to use the technology in a way that you've used it before and that you're comfortable with. So we don't see this at the Olympics that often, but at our next step down competitions, like a World Junior Championships or a World University Games, we make a lot of resources available to athletes, and some of them have not used them before. And it does exactly what Mallory was just referring to. It takes away from the most important piece of recovery, which is just physically relaxing or sleeping. And so, like, knowing how to apply this information or these resources before you get to a place, just because it's available doesn't mean you should use it. That is spot on, exactly how we hope people will use the technology that we provide.
Yeah. And I think really, really quick, sorry, Jenna, we're going to get on our,
Oh, no,
I think there's also to that, what's really interesting too, is you need to understand yourself. And we just had the conversation around mental health, right? And a big piece of performance, in my opinion, once you get to a games, probably the most crucial point of performance is where are you at in your headspace. And you need to know, if you are an athlete that is a little type A, which most of us are, let's be real, and you are over analytical, that maybe isn't the best scenario for you to be consuming all these data points, because then you're going to analyze every little hundredth of a second that you were too slow here, you were too quick here, and that made you slower here. And you're going to just be thinking like a mad person in that ready room versus just getting yourself into flow so you can go do what you've trained to do. And so I think, again, it's just knowing your personality, or for some people, those data points might help them feel in control in a situation that there's also a lot we can't control once you get to a high performance situation, right? And so knowing your kind of headspace and how the data and technology also affects how you approach it from a mental standpoint, I think is crucial to how your individual performance is. And at the end of the day, also understanding we all kind of approach this from a different standpoint, and not one way is the most successful. There's people that have created a lot of his success on this end of the spectrum and people that have done the same over here. And that goes into even just from an entrepreneurship standpoint. What my husband and I do with our business may not be the same as what another production studio does. We have different things that really work for us that maybe go against the grain on some of the different industry standards versus being by the book on industry standards. And then some, some other businesses do it a little bit different way, and that works for them. And I think understanding what works for you is the most important part of this equation when you're trying to get performance.
I couldn't agree more. There's no central one perfect game plan for everybody. If we all followed it, then we wouldn't have the standouts that we have. You really do have to listen to yourself and what works the best. I ran for Baylor University, and so Michael Johnson continued to train with Coach Hart throughout his career. So several of the years that I was there, he trained there on the track, and so just to watch him was amazing. And for him, he had to know that he believed at the end of the day he had done more to prepare for that moment. So when he stepped on the line, he could look to the right, he could look to the left, and he already knew he had earned the race. But yes, I couldn't agree more that you have to know what works for you. And I read a really interesting article too, that because of everything that happened with COVID and the lack of races, suddenly all these athletes that so often live their life and sort of equated their value to a specific time, the freedom of letting that go. And maybe that's part of what was so amazing for you this weekend to shatter the record, because you didn't have that same sort of shackled relationship with time.
There is a lot of truth to that. And I think that, when we started the conversation, Matt talked about how we define success. And I think that for myself, Rio was a moment that really taught me about that relationship as an athlete of how do I define success in my career. And, in all honesty, 7 years ago this spring, I thought I was going to retire from the sport because I had just sustained my arm injury. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I wasn't driving. I literally couldn't do any of my daily living things because I'm paralyzed. I need two strong arms, and one of them was down. And so I didn't see a path forward for my career as an athlete. And luckily I didn't. Luckily my community came together and supported me and helped me fight for that dream. But I went into Rio with this thought process that if I didn't defend my gold medal from London, then it was all a waste and it would be a failure. And when I got 11th in prelims in the 50-meter free, my Paralympic gold medal event from London, and saw the top 8 move on to finals without me, I realized that I had never been more proud as an athlete because I still showed up. I fought a fight that so many people would have given me the free pass to say, like, yeah, I get it. Retire while you're on top. Injuries are tough. That's part of being an athlete. And I chose to show up and fight. And I did it with my values intact. And I think that when we can separate our idea of success from accolades, it changes the game and it opens up this freedom to lean into who you are as a person, which in a lot of ways makes you better, faster, and stronger, right? When you let go of this constraint of I have to this, these are the metrics I need to hit, and you just kind of let it be what it's going to be and put all your energy into that journey and doing what you can do. I think that was so powerful for me in Rio, and I'm so excited for Tokyo because, sure, I've been thinking of gold since I got off the podium on September 2nd, 2012. Not that anyone's keeping track or anything over here, but I know that I don't have to win gold in Tokyo to make this journey worth it. I'm making it worth it every single day that I show up and fight for this dream. And that's what success is, like showing up and being your best self in what you do. And the outcome, that's just icing on the cake at the end of the day.
So Matt, and you talked about this too, success is measured far beyond just the medal. It's also being there as a support system for the second chapter of an athlete's career, because so much of it is for this defining moment, but then there is the next day and what happens the next day from there. And Mallory, you've already lived your life very intentionally and began that the entrepreneurial path on that front as well. Anything else that you can share with us about TFA Productions and what you've learned there that's tapped into you as not just a resilient athlete, but the parallel learnings as a resilient entrepreneur?
You know, what my husband and I have done with the business has been, first of all, just so much fun, because we get to share what we love to do professionally together every single day. And not many couples get to do that. And I think that that is really special. And I'm so proud of everything we've done with TFA Productions and then TFA Group, the parent company. And we are a social impact agency and production studio. So we represent a number of Paralympic athletes in their marketing rights and interests. And then we also have the production entity. And there's pitfalls, there's learning curves. And I think for us, the biggest one is helping advance the Paralympic movement and the education curve with companies we work with on having the conversation around diversity and inclusion and how disability fits into that, and how to authentically integrate individuals with disabilities into greater representation on screen when we're talking about the production side. And I think the biggest thing that I've really enjoyed about it is we are both athletes. My husband played football in college, and I obviously am still currently an athlete. And so many of the things that you learn on the field of play go into this journey, right? I mean, we might try something today and realize, ooh, that didn't work so well. We need to pivot tomorrow, but there was one piece of it that worked. And I think for any entrepreneur, especially in the startup phase, that's so crucial. You cannot just like throw every egg you have in one basket and put all of it in. You've got to be able to kind of pull a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and then put them together, see how that works. And if it doesn't mold right, you know what, tomorrow we're going to try to remold it a little bit different. And that's what I do every day in training as an athlete as well. And so I think that's been really fun to kind of come home from the pool and go into what we're doing with the business. We haven't had any colossal like, oh crap, what did we do? We have not had that yet. And I say yet because I think in the life of a business, it's going to happen, right? It's like in the life of being just a human being, we're all going to have those moments where like, oh shoot, that was not what we were supposed to do. But we try to be extremely intentional. And I think the biggest thing that I've seen as an athlete and as a businesswoman is it's really important you surround yourself with the right people. You are not expected to have every single answer, nor should you. And that's why you surround yourself with people who you can lean on, and you pull a little bit of a nugget from here and from there, and you kind of bring it back to the table, and you see how that works and fits for what it is that you are trying to do. And that's so important, because the minute you think you have all the answers is the minute you are in really big trouble, because no one of us has all the answers to anything. I'm a 15-time world champion. I need my coach. I need him. I need his brain. I need his thoughts. I need my strokes still critiqued, because until the day I retire, they will never be perfect. And I will retire and they won't be perfect then either, because you need to have a growth mindset when you do that. And I think that goes into business too.
Oh, could not agree more. And it's usually in those times of it didn't go as planned, that's where the rich learnings are. In our house with our daughter, we refer to them as the beautiful oops, because at the end of the day, it is a gift of incredible learning. And I realize I've done a horrible job of leaving space for questions for those of us who have joined us. And there's actually an interesting one from Rob on Twitter that I think is an interesting parallel. And this is for you, Matt. are there other roadmaps or tragedies or global events that you or your Olympic teams use to figure out and navigate 2020? And if not, is this an experience, the beginning of a different kind of contingency plan?
That's a great question. No, there was not. We did not look backwards or look for any historical retrospective to inform what we were doing, because to be frank, when it was really bad, we were just on fire. Like there was no, like, the floor was lava and there wasn't a lot of time for trying to figure that out. I do think that this has exposed some things that we can do better and structurally. I think there are some, weaknesses in what we do that would not have been exposed without this. And so, yes, I think there will definitely be process improvements, and there will be structural improvements, and I think there will be service improvements for what we provide to our athletes and coaches. And I think there will be greater efficiencies that are developed in the way that we approach the service that we provide. As far as contingency planning, I think we're definitely learning about. We put a lot of thought and effort into the plans that we make, especially for competitions. So for our domestic competitions, the Olympics, World Championships, and any other international competition, like, there's a lot of work that goes into all of those things. And sometimes those plans, I think, can get sort of locked and be a little bit rigid after they're set. And we realize now that maybe being flexible and having the ability to pivot, even if it's not, I hope it's not pivots like this, where we have to move everything, at the drop of a hat, but being able to pivot to make small improvements will make us more dynamic, more responsive, and provide better service overall. I think there will be things that come out of this that stick. I hope that we're not getting on airplanes for one meeting anymore. Like, things like that will be a little bit more efficient. But man, I guess if I could go back and do it over again, I would like to have had the time to sort of look at past disasters and try to figure it out. It just wasn't an option really at the time.
Yeah, it was fire drills for all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure, Mallory, that you can appreciate it in a normal forum. And even when we shared the stage, that required travel and going somewhere, which takes you away from time in the pool and the feel in the pool. So couldn't agree more, Matt. I'm excited to say goodbye to, the 6-hour flight for a 2-hour meeting. None of that makes sense. Mallory, any additional thoughts you'd add on that front?
No, I think that aspect of what you were saying of some of the efficiencies that we get to bring into what we're doing. And we've all learned to be more intentional in what it is that we're doing and how we are doing it. And sure, that was forced early on because we had to find a way to do that. But I think there are some blessings in that. Today, when we get off, I will, within 30 minutes of getting off, be able to be in the pool for afternoon practice. And in no scenario pre-COVID and everything we've gone through would that be something I can do. I would be planning my entire training week and probably even maybe the 2-week period of what's that 14-day training cycle going to be. If it's a midweek day that I'm not going to have access to water, that would shift my days off on the weekend. Like, there's thought that goes into that. And it was something I juggled going into Rio, and I was juggling going into Tokyo. And, you can make it work, but it is kind of nice to take a breath and realize I just don't have to. I maybe move a few training times around in a day, but other than that, I can enjoy being present for the both sides of what I enjoy doing as an individual. And I hope that those are things we can carry forward. I think we've all learned some of those little nuggets.
I couldn't agree more. And this is probably a good question from Katrina from Instagram to kind of close out on. And again, it's going to go back to the personal impact, Mallory, for you. So when you talked about the mental shift and it made you wonder about the family planning, was there a time, did you give yourself the space to just mourn that mom you thought you were soon to be?
Yes, I did. And I think I still do. It's boomeranged around a few times. I did, and then I was strong and good. And then we kind of hit that time where I knew this would be when that process would start. and there was mourning. And I think it's also we're now getting to the point where we're already within 4 years to Paris, and I'm not ready to retire after Tokyo. I would love to have my husband and I both to have more than one child. And this is getting into the weeds, but then your mind goes to 2 kids in a 3-year quad and being in shape as an athlete is like literally almost virtually impossible as a female athlete. 2 and 4 years is already like everything would have to time up perfectly. And as we all know, anyone who's had a families don't always time up perfectly. And there's a lot you can't control. And so everything was hypotheticals. And that was challenging. And I think sitting down, and even when I was writing Limitless, and there were aspects in it where my husband and I chose together in the final chapters to share our own journey of what our journey to parenthood is going to be. And just reliving some of those emotions. It was really tough, but I also have taken that into my training. And now every day I go to the pool, and I hope that someday when our child and or children come into our life, I can share this story and remind them of just that we all deserve a chance to fight for our dreams. And you know what, mom and dad had an extra year that we fought, and you were an extra year delayed into our lives, but here we are all these years later. And they, whoever they are, they're still already so much a part of this journey, because every day I swim, I know what it is that my husband and I both chose to continue to put on hold so I can have this chance to keep fighting for this dream. And in a lot of ways, I'm at the stage now where that invigorates me versus weighs me down. And it's just this reminder of I'm showing up and fighting for a dream that's about something so much bigger than me. And that just makes it that much more exciting. And there's not a weight of pressure with that. There's just an extreme amount of joy, I think, that goes with that now.
Yeah, well, I think it takes us full circle to where we started, which was, how do you measure success? And a full and complete life is that. And so with intentionality, I know you will be jumping into the water in Tokyo and bringing more intentionality because of all that is at stake and all that you are doing to build that intentional life. So, and Matt, same thing for all that you do to guide our Team USA hopefuls. This has just been a really fantastic relationship, and that we've had with USA Swimming in support of SportsTech, and Mallory, same thing. Just you could not be a better example of an athlete and an entrepreneur, and the same shared characteristics of character there. So thank you both so much for the time. We are actually a little bit over, but it was a conversation that that I found really impactful and hard to end. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna.